Hello, aloha, and welcome to History 241, Civilizations of Asia, Session 14, Ancient China, from about 2000 BC to 1050 BC. My name is Abdul Karim Khan. I teach here at Leeward Community College. And please note down my latest phone number as well as the email and contact me anytime you want, and I'll try my best to get back to you. But before that, please also check out the WebCT course outline and see if you need, something help, or you need to check out the scheduled readings or the tests or whatever assignments that might be coming. So please check WebCT regularly and contact me if you need my help. Let's see what we did last time in terms of the presentation. We talked about Islam, the rise of Islam with the prophethood of Muhammad. And then we went into the world of Islam, how Islam started from Mecca and Medina and spread in the rest of the world, north, east, south, west. And the two major sources of Islam, the Islamic religion, the Quran and Hadith, the word of God and the word of Muhammad, as we said. We also talked about the Sharia, the Islamic law, which is based on the Quran and Hadith. Also, we talked about at length the Islamic beliefs and practices, what it takes, to become a Muslim, and what practices Muslims follow. We also talked about the women's status in Muslim societies in different places, how women are treated and what they can and what they cannot do. And also we talked about jihad, the holy war in Islam. So that was in much more in the context of India, but also outside India, how Islam started. Now we're going into from South Asia, that is India, into East Asia, and that would be China, and from China we would go into Korea and Japan later on. Just to give you what we did so far, first we focused on the Asia as the Asian region. Then we went from the Asian region to South Asia, that is India. And now from India we're going into China, that is East Asia. So what India is to South Asia, China is to East Asia. And just as India is the major country in South Asia, China is a big country, the biggest country or the major country in East Asia. So that's why we start with China, the older civilization in East Asia. So let's see what we have today. In China, we will talk about the geographical regions of China, basically the geography of China. We would also focus on the origins of the Chinese civilization, so that is the place and the people, and how civilization started in China. Also, to begin with, the Xia Dynasty. We will talk about the very humble beginning of the Chinese civilization with the Xia Dynasty, and then continuing into the Shang Dynasty, the next dynasty that is considered to be like the second dynasty, or the first the second of the first two dynasties in Chinese history. We would also talk about, because we can more talk about the Shang government, Shang state and Shang religion compared to the first dynasty, the Xia, so that's why we would be spending time about more on the Shang dynasty. Also, the beginning of the Chinese writing and how this writing, started in China, and what were the causes, or rather the prime motives of the beginning of the Chinese writing. So from there, we would also get into a little bit of the early Chinese religion, how it got established and what were the beliefs at that time. At the outset, I would like you to remember that in this presentation, it would help you if you note down the major characteristics of Chinese geography. If you might remember from, the very first two lectures, sessions, I said that geography is the base for a civilization. So depending on the geographical resources, the geography, hot or cold, water or desert, that would give us the rise of civilization. Civilization being, the story of whatever human beings did. So keep in mind the geography of China and how geography plays itself in, keeping some people rich and other people poor. So the economic disparities in China, not because one group of people are smart and the other are not so smart. No, it's not that way. It's geography and how. So keep in mind how geography plays itself in the rise of good economy as well as in keeping people in poverty. So let's see China. First, the geography. The Chinese civilization, basically it is very geographically isolated, the way it started. But even though it is isolated from or was isolated from the rest of the world, particularly India or Central Asia, internally the good thing about Chinese civilization was that internally it could be easily unified. Because there were no geographical barriers. Just like in India, you had a lot of mountains, a lot of rivers, diversity, of the geographical barriers in India, which kept the Indians, sort of from coming together. And so it did not, geography did not allow the Indian people to come together. But here in China, there were no such geographical problems to keep people apart. So that was internal unification was easy in China, although unification itself would be a big theme in Chinese history. Keeping China united, that would be a major task of any ruling dynasty throughout history from ancient time even to modern times, how to keep everybody together. That would be a major theme in Chinese history, unification. Further, Chinese civilization is the most continuous civilization, which means that there are no major breaks in the Chinese civilization. It is a very original civilization in the sense that other nations, other civilization did not influence it. And that's the reason it's a unique civilization, unique to this place, which is China. So there is a sort of uniqueness about Chinese civilization that no other people did what it did. That's the uniqueness about the Chinese civilization. When we say it's the most continuous civilization, that means whatever language or whatever people were established in the beginning, and the beginning we start with 2,000 years before Christ. From that point onward, you see the same people, the same culture, the same language in speech as well as in writing. That is not the case with people in the rest of the world. For example, a great civilization that Egypt was. The Egyptian writing completely forgotten. Nobody writes, in the same language anymore. Nobody speaks the same language there. Nobody follows the same religion there. In Egypt, it is now Islamic, very Arabic, and much more, part of like the Mediterranean and African world. Similarly, the Greek civilization, which was the original Greek civilization, although the language is there, but the religion is missing. They were pagans at one time, and then, Christianity came and it became a major Christian nation. But in China, you don't see these type of major changes, the complete change of the people, the complete change of their culture or their language or their religion. So that's the reason it is called the most continuous civilization. Okay. Further, it's although uninfluenced by West Asia, which is sort of Middle East or Central Asia or South Asia, because internally is the cultural unity that it has, that was enough for China to develop and create its own civilization based on common language, common literature, common experiences in a very isolated, geographically isolated place. Although it is uninfluenced by other nations, but the Chinese civilization is the most influential civilization in East Asia, because the Chinese civilization later on will be exported to Korea, to China, and even in Southeast Asia. So that's why it's a very, most influential civilization. Its culture would be adopted by Koreans, by Chinese, Japanese, and later on, this civilization would also be taken by Chinese wherever they would go. They would take their language like other immigrants would take their language, their culture, their food, and wherever they are, you would see Chinese with their civilization or their culture, their language, their food, like Chinatowns. If you go to Canada, Europe, England, United States, any major city, United States would have its Chinese immigrants, and so that's how it is spreading, with the people. However, inside home, in the East Asian context, this is the civilization. This is the culture which was adopted by the Koreans and the Japanese. Let's see further. Ancient China, the name of China or naming China. China, this term that we use in the United States, it was basically a Roman term. The Romans started close to about 200 BC, calling that place China, and the reason was that at that time in China, at that time this Qin Dynasty was ruling, and so that's why the Romans started calling it China, the land which meant to them the land of the Qin people or the Qin Dynasty. So that's why from the Qin Dynasty we get the term China or the name China of that country. To the Russians, compared to the Romans or Western European people, they started calling it by another term, Cathay, or Kitai, as they still call it, in Russian language. To the Arabs, it was Shin. Again, taken much more from the Mediterranean people, China. So the Arabs would call, China as Shin and Shini or Chini. But to the Chinese themselves, their country is like the Middle Kingdom, and that's the loose translation in English of the Chinese name, the Middle Kingdom. And the reason for that was from very early on, the Chinese had figured out their geographical location, or maybe the lack of other geographical places on planet Earth. So as you see with so many other civilizations, so many other nations, they think that they are, in the center and surrounded by other people. And this is exactly what the Chinese believed, that their country was the center of the universe, the heavenly kingdom. And they had not only a geographical sense about themselves, but at the same time their connection with heaven. So they are on earth, the earthly world, the earthly kingdom, and that earthly worldly kingdom had a connection with the supernatural or the spiritual or the heavenly kingdom, and hence the name of China, which loosely translates in English as the heavenly kingdom, which is, sort of a claim to something, to spirituality, to their geographical place, to their centrality in the universe or on planet Earth. And that, unfortunately, just like with so many other civilizations, also with the Chinese, if you are not Chinese, from very early on, they had this sense that you are not a civilized person or as civilized as the Chinese were. So they have their own, sort of a historical superiority complex or mythology about themselves, which is around the name of the kingdom or the region, the China, the country, as the heavenly kingdom. Let's see further. The geography in China, here you see China all in red, and it's a huge, big country, surrounded by other nations that we would talk about later on. But for now, you could see, Mongolia in the north, and Southeast Asian countries like Bangladesh, Myanmar or Burma, and Vietnam in the south, India in the southwest, Central Asia, like modern-day countries of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan in the west. Central Asia in the west, and in the east, the Pacific Ocean and Korea and Japan. This is sort of, the neighboring geography. So for the geography is concerned, China is usually divided into two regions. First, the north, which is very dry, and that dry place produces its own crop, the wheat. So it's a sort of a north and south division. That's the first division, north and south. In south, which is wet, a lot of water, a lot of rain, and because of that, because of a lot of water, you have a lot of rice. So keep this two division, north and south, dry and wet, wheat and rice. That is a major characteristic Chinese division, north and south. There are other divisions that we will talk about, east and west, a little bit later. But keep this geographical division in mind. And where is the dividing line? We would see that in a minute. There are also stereotypes between the people of northern and southern people. So northern people, they look down upon south. The southern people, as the southern people, as so many countries also, they look down upon the northern people. So they have their own stereotypes about each other. For example, the northern people are always treated by the southern people. To the southern people, the northern people are illiterate, not much educated. Also, north is continental, so their life is a little bit hard. Tough terrain, deserts, and so the people there also are, and believe it or not, that's literally true. They're very tough people. The northern people, tough people, much more living, in poverty, and so they have to work hard, to yank their food out of, their countryside. So that's why to the southern people, they are very tough people. They're very rough people, sometimes uncouth maybe, having nothing but, horses and cattle and dealing with animals rather than with human beings. Also, the northern people are perceived to be taller. Which is, in a way true, taller people. So in reverse, to the northern people, the southern people in China, the South China people, they look like much more commercial people, and because of that, a little bit tricky people, or crooks, that's a very strong word, but tricky people, and although highly educated people, as most commercial and business people are. In the south, agriculture is in abundance, especially rice, and so that's why they don't have to work too hard to get their rice or to get their food. So that's another element. The southern people are also perceived to be like a very clean face or good face looking people, not very tough, and soft face looking people compared to the northern tough and rough face people. So that's, there are some geographical sort of, truths behind these stereotypes. However, when you get too much into stereotypes, there where people get into trouble. So let's see further about the geography of China. There is that division also in China, rather than north and south, which is one. There is also east and west. So this would be like, if I could point out, all this bluer area, this area would be like the east of China, and this one much more the west of China. So let's see what is there to that division. East China, it is closer to sea as we see it, much more closer to sea. Also in East China, people are rich. Well, one reason for that is the East Chinese, they produce a lot of food, a lot of crops. Since they are closer to the ocean, to the sea, that's why they have a lot of business going. And also that area gets a lot of rain from monsoon. An interesting point about monsoon, the way it works in China as well as in India, basically this is the region, Western China, the deserts here, especially the Taklamakan deserts and the deserts here in Central Asia. When that area in summer, it heats up, the air goes up, becomes lighter here, and the air from the ocean, it rushes to take that place, that vacuum, and that's how it triggers the monsoon rain, which is dumped much more right here in this area, in the eastern area of China. And so it creates, bumper crops. So that's why the eastern Chinese much, having better life. For that reason, the West is much more land-based and dry, and the people are poor. That's another division of China: rich China and poor China. Rich people living in the east and poor people living in the west. And that is not because one group of people are smarter than the other. It's the geographical division. What region can produce what and how much? That's just the geographical division, which is also the base of, in any country, the base of economy. Let's see further. Still in the geography of China, there are characteristically three major regions in China. One is North China or Northern China, which has its own great river, characterized by a river called the Yellow River. The second region is the Yangtze River region, which is again characterized by its own river Yangtze, and also how Yangtze provides an outlet to the East China Sea. Another region, a major region in China, very rich, that is South China. And that is how Southeast Asia is connected to China in the south, in South China. So that's another, the Southeast Asian connection with China, like Vietnam, Thailand, other places in Southeast Asia, how they're connected to South China. So that connection gives another characteristic to the Chinese place, geography, as well as people. Further, Northern China, as I said, it's characterized by its Yellow River. There it is. The Yellow River, it runs from west, but it takes sort of a northeastern course, and then right here, most of it is consumed in the desert. And then it takes a southern bend, and then it goes into the Yellow Sea. So it takes, it starts from the west, goes north, and then south, and then east, and whatever there is, like the desert, especially here, that consumes the water of the Yellow River. Speaking of Yellow River, as I said, it starts from the west, flows through central highland in China, in the mountains, and as well as in the desert, and it brings a lot of wind-blown loess soil. That loess is a very soft dust that comes from the northern part of China and Central Asia, but this is very rich dust, and that's why it gives, food and products to northern China. It empties itself in Yellow Sea, another name because of the Yellow River flowing into that sea and muddies the water, and hence the Yellow Sea. Northern China Plains, which is a major characteristic of northern China. It's a semi-arid and it's a very desert-like place, and that's why life is sometimes very difficult. The rain is not much, 20 to 30 inches rain per year. It's very cold, it's very continental. So it's cold winter, and the growing seasons are very short, from 4 to 6 months short growing season. So that's why, don't expect food to be there much in northern China. And that's hence the relative poverty of the people in north and northwestern China. All right. Let's see the food products. Millet, that has been a major product of China, especially in the north. Wheat is another product of China, also in the north, and so the beans and other continental, food stuff that people grow. It is also in northern China that some people, I don't know how true that would be unless and until, well, these days easy to count. Northern China would have much more, because it's hot and dry and cold and rough and tough, as well as lack of food is the major characteristic of that area, north and northwest China. The animals there are smaller animals, sheep, goat, that would be much more northern Chinese. Sometime, cow, cattle would be also there, but sheep and goat would be much more. In the south, you would have the bigger animals because there is much more food, a lot of cows and especially water buffaloes, very much part of South China that we would talk about. Let's see further. The Yangtze region, the central region of China. We started from the north going into center and then we would go into south. The Yangtze River, Changjiang, which literally means, the long river or longest river. So this river, just like the Yellow River, but much more than the Yellow River, the Yangtze River is, the one that gives China a real great economic boom and much more associated with economy and, production of these days, power, electricity, and a lot of other irrigational networks. Yangtze River, it is the longest river in China, 3,859 miles is the longest river in China, the third longest in the world. The second longest is the Amazon, and the first longest river is the Nile in Egypt. So after the Nile and the Amazon rivers, the Yangtze River is the third largest river or longest river in the world and the longest in China. Also, it divides China into north and south. This is not really a great scientific division of China if you do it by Yangtze River, but still, traditionally, Chinese have divided north and south by the Yangtze River. So any group of people who lived in the north, they would be northern Chinese, and those who lived in south would be south Chinese. And that division is by the river, and it goes very east-west. It starts from the west and it originates in eastern Tibet, in western China, and then it goes and empties itself in, flows towards Shanghai in East China Sea. Also, it connects the hinterland of China with the Sea of China. And Yangtze River, it has its own great, wonderful delta, where Shanghai area is by Shanghai, and that, the Yangtze River, there is the Three Gorges Dam that everybody is talking about, sort of international news, the Three Gorges Dam, and there, it runs from, as I said, from west, to east, and here closer to the eastern section, there you have that dam. It's a huge big project in China. The dam itself is more than a mile dam. And when it is finished, it would have, hundreds and if not thousands of miles area under cultivation. So the Chinese government is looking forward to the completion of this dam. However, it has generated a lot of controversy. Some people believe that it would not give as many benefits as the government says. Already it has displaced millions of people from that area and the Chinese communists being the communist regime, it can easily move people, order people from one place to another place, and that's how, had it been a democracy, there would have been a real, debate about whether to make this dam or not. But since it's the opinion of the experts in China, they believe this would be in the larger interest of China. So some people have to sacrifice, their comfort, leave their places, their homes, their villages that had been there for hundreds and thousands of years and move them to somewhere else. And that's what people were not happy when they were moved from their original homelands to other new places. How much it would produce, we would see that later on, maybe in History 242. Okay, let's move on. There is the three sort of gorges that, the dam is built beyond that, not here, but beyond. The Yangtze Delta, close to Shanghai area, that area, it's a huge big delta and produces a lot of food crops for China, especially East China. The northeastern plains in China, much more characteristic for the food that it produces and a lot of wealth that it produces. Agriculture and industry and commerce has been booming, for a long time in China, and that's what you see there when you go to China. A lot of industries, a lot of agriculture, a lot of commerce coming from out of northeastern plains of China. There's also a major source of commercial level rice, industrial level rice, fish, and pork, and other foodstuffs. This area has been, for a long time, the center of largest population and major cause of pollution in East China Sea. So, for all this production, especially industrial production, one has to pay the price, and that price is right away, pollution. And sometimes when you go there, you see always this overcast like Seattle, but it's much more pollution. Because of the pollution, you see that overcast, and you don't see for days the sun. So that's a major problem and concern in China, according to environmentalists. Those people who are much into the production and the progress in China, they don't care about it, and they say it's all gloom and doom by the environmentalists, and so they move on with the progress of China, more smoke and more pollution in China, and that's how people they progress and make industrialized countries. All right, let's see further. Still in the geography of China, South China. That is from the Yangtze Valley, in the north to further south where the borders of Vietnam and Thailand would touch upon China. So that's the real south. It's hot and humid, and summers are, sometimes uncomfortable, very green, very fertile, yes. The growing season is longer than the northern, 6 to 9 month, long growing season with 60 inches of rain, a year. And then in 1 year, you can get 2 to 3 crops of rice. That's a lot of production, but that, South China can afford it. Let's see some, these are the rice paddies in South China. And not only in the plain, but also in the mountains. And since there is a lot of rain, a lot of water, that's where people can afford to grow, rice on the mountain. This is terraced agriculture rice or terrace cultivated rice. When you look at it, it looks very beautiful. The next slide, it looks like an artwork, but that's a natural artwork. This is not a painting. This is a real picture, a real photograph of these hills and mountains upon which you see the green area. These are rice paddies, and the one that are not green, these have been left alone for a while so that they would get their nitrogen from the sun and regenerate the soil, and then they could be also brought under green rice paddies. All right. South China, much more transportation is done by water than land because there is so much water there. A lot of small, though not major, but small rivers, canals, and lakes. And life is much more closer to water, and that's why it's true, that some people, they spend their entire lives in boats, because they don't have that much concern with the land. And so they're much more sea-oriented or water-oriented people. The coastline is dotted with a lot of ports, good for economy, good for business, commerce, and reaching out to other people. These ports like, Shanghai and Canton and other places. That's the place European came to China. So Europeans accessed China from South China by ships, just like Europeans accessed India from East India. Similarly, European came to China from South China, and that's where, the first European, the Portuguese, the French, the British, the Americans came. So South China, there you would see much more European influences. Even today, if you go to places like Shanghai, you would see, the 19th century buildings that were built by Europeans, particularly the British in 1860s, 1870s, and early, 20th century in China. So there's much more, European had business with South China. Western China much more, open to the influences of Central Asia, particularly Muslims, and that is why Western China is so Islamic, full of Muslim people in the West. So that's how whoever reached China from whatever direction, they left their imprints and they left their influences in those places. So if looking for English schools or European style school, that would be much more in South China. All right, let's see further. There are 5 major surrounding areas surrounding China. One is in the west, Xinjiang, or previously called Xinjiang in the west, which is very Islamic, a lot of Muslim there. Tibet in the southwest, and Mongolia, in the north. Korea in the east, Vietnam in the south. So these are some of the major, regions, and of course beyond southwest of the Himalaya, you get into India, and but unfortunately nobody could scale, the Himalaya from China into India or from India into China. Otherwise, there would have been much more interaction between the two nations. All right. Now, getting out of geography, going into, the people and the places of China, the languages of China. There is a lot of ethno-linguistic diversity in China because it's a huge, big country. That's the reason. Geographically big, and so it attracted other people, other nations, especially in the West. In the north, the dialects are Sino-Tibetan dialects that are spoken in the northeast and southwest China. There are Turkic, Uyghur, Muslim people speaking Altai languages in the west. It's a different group of languages. The Tibetan and Mongols, their own languages mixed up with Chinese and producing their own, each one producing their own dialects. So there are a lot of dialects, and sometimes these dialects can be very dramatic in the sense that those speaking in the north are completely unintelligible in the south. So the northern people do not speak the southern people, and vice versa. Then the Koreans and Vietnamese also, they have their own, dialects mixed up with the Chinese, these major languages mixed up with the Chinese, and have produced their own dialects and diversity in China. All right. This is a rather recent map of China, and the orange or the yellow color that you see, that is much more like a modern day Mandarin. Right here, the yellow, and so it's very much diversified. Even this area, it also speaks Mandarin. So thanks to Mandarin language, every Chinese person who has been to school or college, educated person would speak Mandarin, and that gives sort of a unity. This one is much more closer to Tibet, and inside Tibet, and it has its own language, the Tibetan area. This one much more Mongol, closer to Mongolia. Right here is Mongolia, and this is the inner Mongolia part of China, and that's why there is the Mongolian language. These are Central Asian Altai languages spoken by the minorities of China, especially the Muslim people. So there is a lot of linguistic and ethnic diversity in China. All right. Going into the origins of the Chinese civilization. Much more, it started in the Yellow River area, that is northern China. So northern China has been characteristically the birthplace of the Chinese civilization. That's how historians treat it, because that's where governments and states originated. It does not mean that there were no people in the South. There were people in the South, but at the same time, government and state, that was part of northern China. Just like other major rivers, for example, the Egyptian river, the Nile River, it produced the Egyptian civilization. The Indus River, which is now in Pakistan, that produced the Indus Valley civilization. So wherever you had a major river, there you had a major civilization. So that was also the case with China. Because this major river that you have, the Yellow River in northern China, it produced its own culture, its own civilization that later on would be known as the historical Chinese civilization. But as I said, it does not mean that there were no people in the central area, in the Yangtze River or further south. In fact, as we discussed in the previous sessions, in the beginning of the whole presentation, South China had much more people because it was a rich place, and closer to Southeast Asia. So there, if there was the formation of the state, of the government, of great armies, great bureaucracies, it should have been, much more in the south, but that's not what happened. It started basically from the north. So northern Chinese creating a civilization that traditionally would be called the Chinese civilization. Let's see further. That civilization, or the rise of the Chinese culture, going as back as 2000 BC. That is the late Neolithic period, from 2000 BC to 1600 BC. Late Neolithic period. When we say Neolithic period, that means the prehistoric culture, or the beginning of the prehistoric culture, where a major component would be agriculture. So when we say late Neolithic, culture or prehistoric culture, it does not mean that it, it had writing, but what it means, it had a good agriculture. Agriculture and the use of wheel, especially in northern China, that started, the Chinese civilization. Agriculture, particularly. And when we talk of agriculture, this is not just agriculture, something that people can grow in their backyard. This agriculture is on a huge, big, massive scale that would go on for longer time, would give people much more experience, and is the result of the previous experiences. That type of agriculture to feed more people for a longer time. And as agriculture spreads, it creates its own culture. And it is on the base of that culture that later on you would see the rise of civilization. Civilization being a second stage of the culture, or a later stage, or a higher state of a culture, where people do not worry so much for growing their food. They already have the food. They already know how to grow food for a longer period and a larger population. So this culture would create Chinese civilization based on art, based on writing, based on final details of religion, and also based on the Chinese civilization on the art of government, or the science of government, how to rule people, how to control people, how to influence people through culture, through religion, through politics, and also the use of military, not just to raid another area, but to bring people under political unity and keep them united, the use of army. So here, keep in mind, going back to the presentation, keep in mind the rise of agriculture and the use of wheel as early as 2000 BC. However, when we say 2000 BC, keep in mind this is also late. At least by 1000 years it is late compared to the rise of the Indus Valley civilization. Okay, it is this period from about 2000 BC that we get the start of this not city-states but village-state, which is called the Xia culture or the Xia dynasty. A lot of historians, previously European historians, they ignored, they did not, recognize the existence of the Xia dynasty in Chinese history. One reason was it was very ancient, like 2,000 years before Christ. But the Chinese traditional text or the traditional history of Chinese, they not only would talk about it, that there existed a culture or a dynasty called the Xia dynasty, but they also had a list of the kings that it produced. But Europeans saying, well, where is the evidence? And the Chinese say, well, the major evidence is right here. This has been part of the folklore, part of been the history. And the Europeans saying, no. If you cannot prove it archaeologically, then you cannot talk about it historically. So it may be part of your legend, maybe part of the mythology, made up stories, but not real history based on proof of archaeology. But now, more and more European historian, American historian also realize that yes, there did exist the Xia dynasty. There was, or at least a culture that started. Now, when the stuff that they have found, the archaeological item that they have found, that proves that yes, there was, a dynasty or a culture in the traditional history being named as the Xia dynasty or Xia culture. So now more and more people realize that yes, the traditional history was correct. And so because, you needed proof, and now the proof is there. Let's see further. This Xia culture was much more based on village style agriculture, village style, economy, and village style government. And the rulers, their area was smaller, and so they did not have much larger, armies or militaries or government or state mechanism. Only a few people could control a village or certain villages. Since they are mentioned in historical records, that's why, difficult for Chinese to ignore. And because they were important, the Xia people or the Xia culture, they did important things. They started the Chinese civilization. That is why they were so important that they entered into the historical records. Otherwise, they would not have entered into historical records if they were not so important. That's the reason. So, but at the same time, keep in mind the sort of controversy around the existing of the Xia dynasty. So the more we have archaeology being done, excavations and discoveries being done in China, particularly in northern China, the more there would be proof and easier for historians to recognize the existing of the Xia dynasty. There was a time that European did not recognize, or foreign historian did not, non-Chinese historians did not recognize the existing of the next dynasty or the next culture or that started the Chinese civilization, because at that time they did not have any archaeological discoveries. An interesting thing related to this, all this, is that some European did not, or non-Chinese I would say, did not believe in the traditional Chinese records or historical records, because they sounded, very grandiose. For example, in 1950s and 60s, it was very difficult for non-Chinese to believe that a king living as recently, if I could say that, as recently as 200 years before Christ, living closer to that period, 200 years before Christ, and one king, he could create a replica of his entire army, if not entire army, at least a section of the army, men as well as horses, that number in thousands, not just hundreds, but in thousands. And there was this, a clay or terracotta army. When you read the descriptions in the Chinese history, and the non-Chinese people could not find them on the ground or underground. They say, where is the proof? Well, the proof would come when you dig some places and find out, and try to find out. And so in 1970s, this one farmer, he was just, like usual, digging some place or digging a well for water. And when they went a little bit deeper, there he, found a statue of, a person. And then he called the police, and then the government, the Archaeological Society or Department of China, they came and took over the entire place. And from one statue, boy, they found thousands, in hundreds, statues. And not just only men, soldiers, but also their horses. And this was believed to be all, like untrue or false stuff that went into the making of the Chinese historical records. So that's why it was very difficult for non-Chinese historians to believe Chinese history, which they treated as nothing but stories. So that's, now we have, when you Google it or you go in books, in Chinese history books, you see the terracotta soldier, entire army there, along with, their horses. Now, at the same source tells us that there is something else, a palace, a throne, and a lot of interesting stuff. And most people believe, this could be true, but if we dig deeper or somewhere else, we might find it. So that's how, archaeology proves history, and history proves the reality back of history. Let's see further. In Chinese civilization, now this is pre-Shang pottery, and very neat, very, if you look at, very beautiful, which pre-Shang means that is before 1500 BC. That's, amazing. So it means that before 1500 BC, the Xia Dynasty that was there, it must have been there. It did a lot of great things, and no wonder it entered into the Chinese historical records. So if you look at this pottery, it's very neat, very beautiful, very for those ancient times, amazing. 1500 years before Christ, this stuff was produced. So that's why the Xia Dynasty must have pre-existed before the Shang, age or the Shang Dynasty. All right. Speaking of Shang Dynasty, the period is somewhere from about 1500 years before Christ to about 1050 BC before Christ. Some people take it, a little bit further down in history, that like 1700, but most people believe it started somewhere between 16 to 1500, and it went up to 1050. Now, the Shang Dynasty was preceded by the Xia Dynasty, and that's why this date for the Xia Dynasty is from 2000 BC to 1700 or 1600 or 1500 BC. So when it comes to the date system or the periodization in Chinese history as early as this period, you should not be worrying too much for the dates. Just start it as I did, or most historians do, from 2000 BC to 1500 BC. That would be the period of the rise of the Xia Dynasty. From 1500 BC to 1050 BC, that would be the Shang Dynasty. And the reason I'm saying all this is because periodization is very important in Chinese history, like anywhere else, Egyptian or Indian, in China, because China is very historical civilization. It is based on history, and that's why dates and people and persons, the rulers, they matter a lot. Nowhere in the world history or ancient history so much emphasis was given on the memorization of the names of the Chinese emperors and their periods. So that's the reason I also emphasize that keep in mind, right now it's not exact science, but from 2000 BC to 1500 BC, to 1050 BC, that's collectively the period of the Xia Dynasty and the Shang Dynasty. Let's move on. The Shang Dynasty, by all means, it was not a new culture. It was rather a continuation of the prehistoric culture, possibly the Xia. Then that's why there is a question mark. So when it comes to the Shang culture, it was not the beginning of a culture, but a continuation of a previous culture, the prehistoric culture of the Xia Dynasty. That's why it's so beautiful when it comes to the Shang culture. But the region is the same region, the Yellow River region in the north, producing the Shang Dynasty. Also, it is during this dynasty that we see the rise of the political system in China. And this would persist up to some time, although modified and changed, as time would go on. But this is the beginning of a political system in China. Also, religious ideology started during this period from about 1500 BC to 1050 BC during the Shang Dynasty. So that's why it's a very important dynasty, because it gives you the beginning of the political system in China, the beginning of the religious ideas in China, and also very advanced agriculture and agriculture-based economy in China would start in the Shang Dynasty. Now, during the Shang Dynasty also a lot of art, a lot of pottery, a lot of writing, and so this artistic and literary expression would start in the Shang Dynasty. So this is like the beginning of almost everything. The politics, the religion, agriculture and art, literacy, writing and reading. So that's why most historians, they give good credit to the Shang Dynasty for starting all this great stuff in China. So since we're going to be talking more about the Chinese civilization, that's why I also emphasize that you take the beginning of China under your good control. So keep in mind the Shang Dynasty, from 1500 to 1050 BC. Let's see further. Just like the Xia Dynasty, Shang Dynasty was also close to, in the region of the northern plains, the northeastern area of China. It was much more located right here, and this is the Yellow River going north and then descending, coming down to south, and there is a bend from south to east. And it was in this southeastern bend that the Shang Dynasty was developed, which was also, as I said, was the birthplace of the Xia Dynasty. All right, let's see further. The Shang government. It was ruled by kings, later on to be called emperors, because emperors, they hold much more authority, more power, and, that's why, and more territory and more people under their control. That's why people refer to call them emperors. These kings, the Shang kings, very authoritarian kings, and they were monarchy authoritarian because they used, armies. And in the Shang dynasty, thousands of troops that they commanded. Also, during the Shang period, you see the undertaking by the state, by the king or the emperor or the monarchy, the undertaking of public works, for example, like construction of roads, not just only for the king, but also for the people, and irrigational networks, very important, road construction and irrigation, like canals, digging, ponds and lakes, and making it possible and feasible and easy for the people to do agriculture, because it is upon agriculture everywhere that economy is based. Also during this period, in the Shang period, you see the storage of grains and metals. Now, for that to store food and metals, you need a strong government, a government that can guarantee people that if there is a drought, you're not going to starve to death. We have food. So this fact that somebody worries, for the bad days ahead, somebody worries for, drought, and they keep food, they collect food to use it later on, that means a very good function on part of the state, on part of the government, and all that happened during the Shang Dynasty, and hence, believing that Shang Dynasty was a real dynasty and a real government, a real state. Let's see further. Shang kings, they also used religion just like you have it, in Egypt and India and other places, they used religious authority, the kings. Some of these kings, they served or worked as high priests, and they would perform, rituals. These kings, under their guidance or sort of a control, they would make calendars to determine sowing and harvesting seasons. So calendar based on agriculture activity and agriculture time goes into the making of calendars. Some calendars, they are based on moon. This calendar, like the one in India, based on sun, are very much attached to the, when to sow and when to, harvest the crops. Also, some of these kings leading people into worship, or they becoming known for worshiping certain deities and asking for rain or praying for rain or economic prosperity. So this was also the duty of the Shang kings, which also other people followed them, or the people who were closer to them in the administration or bureaucracy or in the family, they also took upon themselves this duty to pray to the gods or to the deities or to the spirits to get more rain and more economic prosperity. So keep in mind, the Shang kings, they also use religion in their authority. Now, agriculture has always been very important in China, just like in other places, but very important in China. And so the king himself personally would get involved in the sowing and the harvesting activities of the crops. And that would generate excitement or interest or motivation, among the population. So he would provide sort of a model role to the farmers, and that is the reason in China, the farmers, the people who are engaged in agriculture, activities, these farmers would be taken in social context as good people, as a sort of a better class compared to someone who is just selling and buying. So the reason in China, commercial people, business people, they were looked down upon, because they were not so much needed as the farming communities, as the peasants were needed. And that's the reason that the farmers, they had better social status, they had a better economic status. And that's the reason people looked, to them, and they treated them better compared to traders and businessmen. It's unbelievable now. China, the more we hear of China, the moment we hear of China, our mind jumps to, trade and business, as they do so much international trade. But traditionally, farmers very important in China. They have been always, looked upon traditionally as important people, giving them a better social status in China, because the king himself was engaged in peasant or farming activity. Let's see further. Also, Shang Dynasty used, or the Shang government used, warfare, and that warfare increased the power of the Shang Dynasty. Well, number one, as in anywhere else, it brought victories, and the victories brought land as they conquered other people. It brought them more land, more slaves, and these slaves, they were used for services, of course, but at the same time for sacrifices. So in China, just as you see in some other civilization, human sacrifice was a fact. And, sometimes they were sacrificed to the gods, to deities, and other times they were sacrificed with the death of the king. So these slaves would serve him later on after death. So there was sacrifice of the slaves. Shang military power, also known to other people as the Great Terror of the East, because the Shang state or government or the dynasty, it had, a lot of army that they used. And the more they used it, the more they, of course, brutalized other people, brought them under their control, and hence, the Shang military power getting the title, the Great Terror of the Eastern people. Now, their enemy was a group of people or a family or a dynasty that later on would come into power, was the Zhou people. And these Zhou people living in the Wei Valley, later on we would go into it, they were the Shang were the enemies of the Zhou people, and this Zhou people would wipe out the Shang state, the Shang government, and would institute their own dynasty. Close to about 1500 BC, the Shang government created or built this great capital at a place called Anyang. It is again, on the closer to the region of the Yellow River. Anyang, which had a lot of palaces, temples, and tombs. So Anyang, because the Shang Dynasty is, the second major dynasty, so this Anyang capital became very well known in Chinese history because this is the first time you would get a huge big palace. Never that existed before. A temple, a shrine, or some other government buildings that did not exist before in the history of China. So that's why the Anyang capital is given so much credit or a place in the history of China, because never anything like that existed in the Chinese history. So hence that's the reason. Let's see further. The Shang state, it consisted of the royalty, the royal house, of course. It had its own nobility. Those nobles were warriors, they were officials, bureaucrats, and then of course the common people. Some of them were counselors and chroniclers. Chroniclers are those people who write and record the royal orders or the archives, in the history of China. Some people were diviners and priests. The Shang vassal states, the Shang at the center, the government and the state, and other people in the regions, they were the vassals of the Shang dynasty. They provided men, horses, material items, taxes, and tributes to the Shang state. Very strong state, and this would be repeated quite sometime in history of China. Shang religion. Shang people and the leaders, they worshipped natural deities and ancestral spirits. Speaking of ancestral spirits and ancestral worship, this is believed to be, the Shang dynasty is believed to be the beginning of this ancestral worship that is so much common even today in China. Shang Di, ruler above, or heaven above, this Shang Di emerged in the Shang period as a great sort of god, if we can call him, who was the creator of the universe, the lord of the universe, and he also made or created natural or ancestral spirits. So here you see the rise of a great spirit or god or deity in the religion of China for the first time, or becoming much more pronounced or known in the Chinese history for the first time. Also in the Chinese religion, there were animal and human sacrifices made, at these ancestral tombs or shrine by the emperor or by higher nobility. The emperor was called the son of heaven. And in the Shang religion, man was perceived to be right in the middle of earth and heaven. So he had a lot of central control and central place in the Chinese religion. He was right in the, living on earth, of course, but in the middle of earth and heaven, which also meant whatever he did on earth, that also influenced, heavenly activities. If he was good on earth, heavens would be good also to him, not just individually, but also collectively. So there would be better if human beings, men or people behaved better. Heavens also behaved good. There would be good rain. There would be, no starvation on earth. there would be a lot of peace and prosperity on earth. So human actions also influencing the behavior of the heavens, and so very good connection between the human actions and the heavenly actions. Let's see further. Oracle bones, as we get into the Chinese religion, these were how the king would know the will of the gods or the will of the spirits or the deities. His writers, they would write questions on the bones or the tortoise, shell, and these question once written, there would be also sort of answers also, should this be done or should not this be done, that way. And these bones would be heated up, and when they're heated, the heat would create cracks, and these cracks would go either right or left or in some direction, and so they would be traced to the answer. So that's how the cracks would get the answers. This is the beginning of the Chinese writing, by the way. Let's see some of these shells and bones. There, these one cannot see much clearly the answers or the question, but here you can see the answer and the questions on the left and right. Some on the one side they would be negative, on the other side they would be positive questions and answers, and that's how the crack would go and would give the answer. Right. Here are some other bones. In this one, it says, today will it rain? And then, the bone would be heated up, and it would create the crack, and the crack would go to either yes or no, and that would be the answer, will it rain today? Think about it, compare how we know will it rain today or not in modern times. Chinese script evolved from these pictograms. Chinese original writings were like pictures, and these pictures would create, these ideograms. And here you see the development of the Chinese script coming into being thanks to, first and foremost, to these pictures. This is man, this is a woman, this is a baby, this is sun, moon, mountain, river, rain, bird, and a horse. It looks like something else, but this is horse. All right. The Chinese system, very comprehensive, very complex. This is like figuring ideas in pictures or putting ideas in pictures, motivated more by religious than by commercial needs, as we saw, in the bones. Religious writing, it survived because it was written much more on bones and shells. Political writing, like official records, they were, written on bamboos and silk, and so that's how, they did not survive. Now, going into conclusion, today we did a lot. We talked about the geography of China, the three regions of China, the origins of the Chinese civilization, the beginning of, a dynasty or a state like the Hsia Dynasty to be followed by the Shang state or Shang Dynasty, and then the rise of the oracle bones that produced the Chinese writing. So we established 2-3 things: the geography, the beginning of the state, the Hsia Dynasty, the Shang Dynasty, and the religion based on all this writing that you saw on the bones and the shells. And we would continue into the, further in the Zhou Dynasty as we come back. Thank you very much, and aloha.